what we're going to do now is we're going to take the mainspring out of that little clamp there. I think that will fit, maybe not. Ooh, very, very tight fit. I'll actually run over that with a fine file and bring that down a little bit before we progress any further, because I want to slide that nail through there. Then I'll clip it into this board here, which will hold it in place while we're undoing it. Right, the nail fits through there now. We'll put that into our winding block, but you can see it fits down in there now, and it's going to hold it relatively steady. So I'll take my modified let-down tool that we built in one of my lessons previously and wind it on. In actual fact, the thread's too large. That's not going to work. That'll be interesting. So I'm going to have to use the key winder, which is inherently dangerous because if it slips when I'm winding it, it's going to catch my fingers. So what I'll have to do, I'll wind it up. I'm holding the winding arbor and the nail at the same time, because what I want to do, being a bit careful here, is to cut that electrical cable tie and then slowly let the spring run down while holding the key. That wasn't quite the drama I thought it would be. It's coming down. There's still a little bit of pressure, not much. And there it is, unwound, sitting on the block. Alright, we're now ready to start cleaning the spring. We'll take it all out of our block. We'll remove the key, get that out of the road. We don't want that for the moment. Put that aside, take our metal pin out, put it back in the block. That over there. Right, now we're going to take the spring off the winding arbor. I might have to hold that. I think it's spinning round. So we'll hold that, and there we go, came straight off. See what this looks like. Not too bad. It could do with a little bit of a clean up if I can find a bit of steel wool somewhere, which is never here when you want it. Alright, I'll get a little bit of steel wool and I'll be back. Right, I'll run over that arbor very quickly, see if we can clean it up a little bit. There's a little bit of rust on it, not very much, but it does look better once it's been run over. Alright, there's some oil and grease on the inside of there, so I'll remove that and then we'll get on to cleaning the spring itself. We'll get this piece cleaned up initially. It didn't go through the ultrasonic cleaner because it had the spring on it, and I knew I'd be cleaning it up in kerosene anyway. Alright, that's okay. Put that aside. Well, not easy to see on black. There's our spring. You can see it's in pretty good shape. The coils are concentric and coming out evenly. They're not sort of pulled off to one side, so that means that the spring's not in too bad a shape. Alright, so now we want a tiny little bit of kerosene on a piece of scarab pad, and actually I'll put it further down this end, I think, because it's pretty tiny little spring, that one. I can probably get a better grip if I get it down there. Right, there we go. Now I'll just pull the spring slowly through the scarab pad, holding it tight, and we're not going to get all the way down to the bottom on that because the spring is very, very tight, but that's not too bad. We'll run over that again in a moment. But first up, what I'll do, I'll get a clean piece of cloth and run over the spring, which has got kerosene on it. Let that come out, clean it up. Little bit of dirt there, not very much. Right, another piece of cloth and then run back in the other direction of the spring. Now I've got a couple of Q-tips here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wind around inside that very tight part of the spring that I can't get the kero pad into, and there's not a lot of dirt in there. There's a bit there, but not a lot, and I'll clean that up on the inside. A bit more there. That requires a bit further cleaning. So that's starting to look a lot better now than it was. Judging by the colour of that Q-tip, it wasn't looking that good before. Right, now I'll get some grease and we'll grease that up. As usual, we'll be using my PFTE grease with a toothpick, which will come in very handy in this instance because this spring is very, very tightly wound in there. So what we'll do is we'll run round with some grease, getting in as close as we can, and that is virtually all the way round in there actually, because it's so thin it's working round all right. grind it round and round, and then back out to the wider loops out here. Bit on that, doesn't need much because once we close this up, that's all going to squeeze out, or a big percentage of it's going to squeeze out. Now the outside coil, and we'll put a bit in there. Alright, lid back on the grease and get that out of the road. Back to our machine. It is a machine, I suppose. We'll put the great wheel on and we'll put our modified nail into there. Now this time it's going to, actually take some of the grease off my glove first, and I'll put the winding key back on again. Now this is probably going to take a couple of goes, I think, because you remember before that my clamp slipped off. I had to open it a bit to get it on, to slide it on so that it didn't damage it. I had to open it up a bit, so I've closed it down a tiny little bit, and I don't know how tight or what width I need between there and there until I get the spring wound up. So we'll start off by winding the spring up slowly, a bit at a time, and keeping a grip on it so it doesn't unwind again, which isn't particularly easy, but we need to see how close we can get for the stainless steel clamp to clamp on it, and that is nowhere near. Alright, that's getting very tight, and I don't want it to let go because it's going to fly everywhere. So I'll hold that down. Nope, still not. I reckon we might have to put a cable tie on this initially. There we go, it came off. Alright, fair enough. I'll put a cable tie on that initially, and we'll wind it up and tighten the cable tie down, and then continue to do that after each couple of turns, and we'll gradually be able to tighten the spring down and a bit more in there, and then once we've got that set, I'll be able to put the mainspring clamp on, in theory, and in practice I would think. Alright, I'll get a cable tie and then we'll continue. Alright, so I've got a cable tie. I'll start that off and put it over the side there. So what we'll do, we'll start winding the spring up now as we were doing before, but this time we'll do it in increments, and each time we get it up a bit, we'll tighten up this electrical cable so we can then relax it for a minute. It'll still hold it in place, and then we can start off again and wind it up and just keep tightening up the electrical cable tie. It's a bit tricky with oily gloves on actually, but I'll pull that a bit tighter and I'll let that undo for the moment. And once this is tied up, I'm not going to be able to put that stainless steel clamp on it. However, it doesn't matter because it'll still hold it in place. But it's a matter of continuing, holding the spring down and the winding arbor and the key all at once, and winding it up and then tightening the cable tie. And I think that is about as tight as it was before, and I think that's about as tight as it's going to get. I'll take that out and check it to make sure it's not going to slip off. Alright, we'll try that. We're not going to know until we try, being careful that it doesn't go sporing and fly around the room. And now we can start to put the movement back together again. Alright, well I've got the wheels in between the plates now. That's pretty fine work, as you can imagine. But they're set up properly and moving. As you can see, the mainspring's in. I had to change the angle of the electrical cable tie because it was actually in there and it was catching on that post and I couldn't get it to fit properly. However, it's now in there, and I'll straighten this regulator lever. It's still a tiny bit out, not much, just a tiny little bit. I'll pull it over a little bit at the top. Yep, that looks better. All right. I'm going to put some oil on these pivot points now, including that one there and that one there that hold the balance wheel, because that's the next thing we're going to do, install the balance wheel, and that has to come back a tiny little bit. It's bent out of whack. It's pretty fine, so you've got to be very careful with it, and back that way a tiny little bit. All right. That's that. Now, before I oil these, I'll have a look for that tiny little tapered pin that holds the... There he is. I think it could do is to straighten that out a bit. It's a bit bent. I'll get that in a pair of pliers, being careful not to shoot it across the room, as normally happens at a time like this, as you just saw. Get it in the middle of the jaws this time. That's better, and I'll move that down a bit. That's looking better, I think. Oh, tiny little bit that way. All right. If we can get this one set up properly, we won't have to make a new one. Yeah, that doesn't look too bad. We should be able to use that. We're going to find out in a minute. Alright, first up we'll do a little bit of oiling on our movement, and we're going to want a pretty fine, I think I'll use the watch oiler, I think, because we need a very tiny amount of oil other than on the winding arbor. We'll give that a couple of dabs, one either side, and now down to our pivots. First wheel, second wheel, the escape wheel, and one for the pin pallet. Alright, we'll turn it over and do the other side. Alright, where do we start? Well, we start exactly there. First wheel, second wheel, escape wheel, and the pin pallet. I'll move the wheels a little bit, help the oil run down. That second wheel is pretty tight actually. Let's see if we can... Whoa, that's too tight. What's wrong with the second wheel? No, the pallets are aligned. I'll loosen this nut here on this post and see if maybe that's tightened down too much. Wouldn't have thought so, but that second wheel is very, very tight, and it shouldn't be. No, that seems to be okay. Alright, I'll have a look at that offline so I can get a better view of it. That's better now, it's moving. It still feels a little bit tight, but we'll find out how it works once we connect the spring to it. The pin pallet's moving smoothly. Alright, now we'll put some oil into the pivots. For the balance wheel, we'll put 2 in there, and either side, 2 in there, and over in here. There's the first one, and the second one. Alright, let that sit there for a moment, put the oil away. Alright, now comes the very important part of the operation, and that is reinstalling the balance wheel. We put the balance wheel in first, then we'll attach the hairspring. Now you'll notice that there's a bit of a bend there. That is the depth that the hairspring goes into that post there that has the tapered pin put on it to hold it in place. So first up, what we've got to do is put the balance wheel in, and very carefully, being ultra careful of that hairspring. First up, before we do that, I'll show you something here. Turn it around to make it easier. You'll notice there's a pin there. That little pin goes into the end of the pin pallet. It rolls backwards and forwards. So that pin has to fit in to that little arm there. So very careful of that hairspring in under. That should just slide in there, and it's never easy, these things. It's the end of it's just about the first pivot, and nope, alright, I'll do that off camera. It's too delicate to try to risk that. The balance staff has been installed now. It's pretty tricky getting that tiny little pin down there on the end of the pin pallet escapement, but it's in there now. So the next step, I'll rest my finger on that, it'll be easier. The next step is getting the hairspring, and I've got 2 coils on that. I only want the top one. We'll grab that, see if that'll hold it a little bit so it doesn't move so much. Now we've got to get that outer coil with the bend on it out here so we can put it through the fast-slow regulator without upsetting the coils. That is very hard to see. Spin it round a bit, and there, that's the end we want. Those coils out of the road, and there, that is the end we're looking for. So now we have to put that end in through this fast-slow, the loop on the fast-slow regulator there, which obviously is not easy. A bit more magnification might be a fine thing. Make sure that's... I think there's a twist in that hairspring there, or it's caught up on that pillar. Wow, that is hard to see. That end there is the one we're after, but it's making strange movements on the rest of the hairspring. I think that, yeah, that's what's happened. It slipped out once. Well, that's fun. I've got to take that out and put it back in again. Back in a moment. Well, that's got the balance wheel in right. Still a little bit loose. I'll tighten that up a tiny little bit so that we haven't got so much end play. Still got a little bit much. See how we go. Yeah, that's looking a lot better. All right, what we've got to do now is we have to take this piece of the hairspring, get the end of it, and that goes there. All right, so back to that again. We'll get this piece of the hairspring and it's got to go through that loop there. This needs to be a little bit tighter, I think. It's a little bit on the loose side. I'll tighten that up a little bit. We can always adjust it from the nut down the other end. So we want that to stay in place. I'll do it a little bit more actually. We don't want it moving all over the place. Make it easier for us to get that loop in. Now, where's that loop got to? That's the one there. If I can get it out, that in, and that now goes in through there, and make sure I can hold that so it doesn't come out again. No, that's got him, that's all right. This is not easy as can be seen. Now, that end has to go in through that hole in that post there. I think, yep, that's actually got it. Now we have to hold it there. That's where it goes. Now we've got to put this tiny little, get a better grip on it somehow, tapered pin. Oh, a pair of pliers might be a better option. I don't know. Might hold it more tightly. Now put that down into that hole there. That's the narrow end, right? And line it up and press that in. Gee, that's hard to see. No, it's not there yet. 2/3 of the way, but be careful not to lose it.